I'm Ryan O'Dowd, and you're listening to Ryan's Audiobooks from the Issues Magazine YouTube channel. Today, we're continuing with Section 623, Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson. Chapter 15, Different Models and Different Muddles. It's not just a riot of blots and blurs and disjointed jottings inked by spurts of speed. It only looks as like it as damn it. James Joyce, Finnegan's Wake. Presumably the input software or the brain hardware or both. Reality is the temporary resultant of continuous struggles between rival gangs of programmers. And every moment is a new and shocking transvaluation of all we have ever been. T.S. Eliot, 4 Quartets. When a paradigm shift occurs, when we go from seeing things one way to seeing them another way, the whole world is remade. All that we know is what registers on our brains, so what you perceive, your individual reality tunnel, is made up of nothing but thoughts, as Sir Humphrey Davy noted when self-experimenting with nitrous oxide in 1819, and as Buddha noticed by sitting alone until all his social imprints atrophied and dropped away. The Copernican revolution in astronomy, the Darwinian revolution in biology, the relativity and quantum revolutions in physics have all been as shocking to those who lived through them as the immortalist revolution is today. You can live in the reality tunnel imprinted upon you by environmental accident, or you can choose your own. You can go through brain changes as radically bad as those of Patty Hearst and Rusty Calais, as transcendentally beautiful as those of Buddha and Jesus, as epistemologically revolutionary as those of Darwin and Einstein. You can join those who have already entered the immortalist reality tunnel, the Scientologist reality tunnel, or the communist reality tunnel. There are lots of different realities going around these days, Abby Hoffman once said. Evolutionary acceleration is forcing us to the point where each will have to take responsibility for which reality we accept. 15 million Americans are waiting trustingly for the Space Brothers to come down in the UFOs and enforce world peace. The UFO is or an extreme case, in general, everything we see is inside our heads. This is demonstrated by the well-known optical diagram encountered in every high school physics class. The light rays from the external object are reflected through the lens of the eye onto the retina, and reversed in the process. The brain obligingly reinterprets the picture, turning it right side up, and editing it in other ways more subtle. What is true of vision is true of the other senses. What we know is what registers on the brain. This is the answer to the famous Zen Buddhist koan, who is the divine being who makes the grass green? The brain, in the routine course of the aforementioned 100 million programs per minute, takes in, edits, orchestrates, organizes, packages, labels, etc., all raw existential experience, and classifies it according to the neurological Dewey Decimal System. This system varies from society to society, hence, cultural relativism, what is real to the Inuit is not quite the same as what is real to a New York taxi driver. To review, each individual has a neurological system, or game, different from other members of the same society. In accord with Einstein's physical relativism and anthropology's cultural relativism, we call this neurological relativism. The vegetarian does not see meat on a rack in the butcher shop the same way the meat eater sees it. The racist does not see a member of another race as, say, that person's parents do. More generally, as the poet tells us, the fool sees not the same tree that the wise man sees. Among the many editorial tasks of the brain, performed so rapidly and smoothly that we do not notice it, is the classification of the separate quanta of perception into inside and outside. That this neat system does not accord with brute fact we learn from optics and neurology, that it can be abolished entirely, with great profit in terms of insight. We learn from the type of metaprogramming experience called dhyana in the Hindu and Buddhist traditions. Crowley says of the dhyana experience, in the course of our concentration, we noticed that the contents of the mind at any moment consisted of two things, and no more. The external object, variable, and the internal subject, invariable, or apparently so. By success in dhyana, the object has been made as invariable as the subject. Now the result of this is that the two become one. This phenomenon usually comes as a tremendous shock. Silent meditation on one object for many weeks, like the Zen monk with the ox. In our words, mind, whatever that is, and its contents are functionally identical. The usual system of classifying the contents as me, part of mind, and not me, outside, can be abolished, not just by meditation, but by certain well-known drugs. And the unity of the field of perception is then recognized. We become metaprogrammers. This is what we might expect from the triumphs of field theory and general systems theory in sociology, anthropology, quantum theory, etc. It still comes as a distinct shock when it is experienced, and not just talked about. When I and my world become one, I am transformed utterly, as in a refiner's fire, as the mystics say. This sounds a bit puzzling to the average person without experience in brain change games. Try this illustration. Assuming you are reading this in your own home, look around the room. Note that everything in your field of vision, furniture, paintings, or posters on the walls, stereo set or absence of same, rugs, TV or not TV, etc., is in a sense your creation or co-creation. You and your spouse or roommates selected everything that got into the room. You also selected or co-selected that particular room out of the millions of rooms on this planet where you might otherwise live. The tunnel reality of that room, then, is the very real sense has been created or manifested by you, out of a universe of infinite possibilities. Of course, only the most fanatic Freudian or Buddhist mystic would claim your whole life history has been similarly selected by you. But stop and think a moment. The life history you think you have, the part that's stored in your brain as memory, has certainly been selected. You can't even remember everything that happened in the last 5 minutes. If you try to be inwardly silent and notice everything happening in your field for 1 minute, you're overwhelmed by thousands of impressions that you cannot catalog and retain. Conclusion. Who you are and what you think you are is a creation edited and orchestrated by your brain. Everyone you meet is an artist who has made a similar creation. And these creations are, all of them, as diverse and idiosyncratic as the musical styles of Bach, Beethoven, Rock, Wagner, Vivaldi, Bizet, or Chopin, John Cage, soul, the Beatles, Henry James, disco, Scotch folk songs, and African chants. As for the universe outside of you, you didn't create that. But just because you didn't create it, you can never know it. Except approximately. What you do know and consider the universe outside is another part of your brain, which has made out of its circuits a model which you identify with the universe outside. These models are as varied and miscellaneous as the paintings of Botticelli, Rembrandt, Van Gogh, Picasso, Paul Klee, Wyeth, Dali, and Monet. This is the meaning of the notion that mind and its contents are functionally identical. Consider the old folk rhyme. I saw a man upon the stair, a little man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. Gee, I wish he'd go away. This little man is a semantic spook. It exists only in the language, and yet once the language has invoked him, it almost seems to make sense to wish he would go away. Recent advances in semantics, semiotics, linguistic analysis, foundations of mathematics, logic, etc., have demonstrated that our conceptual field, our symbolic environment, is haunted by many such spooks. There are Empedoclean paradoxes, of which the classic is a box that says everything inside this box is false. Theologians are vexed by questions like, can an omnipotent God create a rock so heavy he himself cannot lift it? If he cannot, he is not omnipotent. If he can, he also is not omnipotent. Philosophers and physicists are still bothered by what happened before time began. Somebody's supposed to have remarked, I'm glad I don't like cauliflower, because if I liked it, I'd eat it, and I hate the stuff. Alice in Wonderland, like any treatise on mathematical logic, will provide hundreds of examples of similar mind-benders. A Zen saying sums it all up. Quote, to think that I am not going to think of you anymore is still thinking of you. Let me then try not to think that I am not going to think of you. Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead attempted to resolve all such conundrums with a mathematical proposition known as the theory of types. Unfortunately, it was quickly pointed out that either A, the theory of types refers to itself, in which case it limits itself by its own terms and does not solve all of our semantic problems, or B, the theory of types does not refer to itself, in which case there are propositions to which it does not refer, and it is again limited, and we are left with our problems. These third circuit perplexities are of more than technological and philosophical import. Many situations in real life take the form of our being haunted by our own semantic spooks. For instance, the popular novel Catch-22 deals with a very sad, real, Epiclodian knot. The hero can escape from the war if he can prove he is crazy. But if he attempts to do this, it will prove he is sane, since it is sane to escape a dangerous situation. The logic of the dream world of Finnegan's Wake is not so far from real life either. A patient of German birth at St. Elizabeth's Hospital would not walk through doors explaining, Die fressen mich die Türen, the doors will eat me. This makes perfect sense phonetically, since it's identical in pronunciation with Da fressen mich die Türen, the animals will eat me. Word magic, schizophrenia, the average person not a vegetarian will respond positively to tender, juicy filet mignon on the menu, but not to a piece off of a dead castrated bull. But the two expressions mean the same thing. We all tend to conjugate sentences in the manner caricatured by Bertrand Russell. I am firm, you are obstinate. He is a pig-headed fool. I am daring and original. You are pretentious. She stinks. I am flexible. You bend with the wind. They're a bunch of opportunists. The magic of poetry creates real toads in imaginary gardens. It has been said, when Robert Burns writes, the wan moon is setting behind the white wave, and time is settling with me, oh. It is hard not to feel that the abstraction time has become as real as the physical moon and wave, or the little man upon the stair. Consider the following table. Any phrase in column 1 can describe persons or events that might very well be described by a different speaker with the corresponding phrase in column 2. Now, the reader may feel that some of the phrases above are so pejorative, so loaded with prejudice, that only the most ignorant or bigoted would use them, but that is irrelevant. What needs to be noted is that it is easy to see the bias in someone else's semantic maps, but not so easy to see the bias in one's own semantic reality tunnel. If the reader were born in Arkansas in the 1920s, item 1 in column 1 might seem the natural or accurate, normal way to refer to the first NAACP worker to appear and try to organize black people. These matters are symbolic, but more than linguistic. For example, the proverbial Englishman who dressed for dinner every night in his lonely tropical hut was no fool. He was keeping an English Third Circuit reality bubble around him to avoid becoming engulfed in the reality bubble of the natives. See what happens to Kurtz in Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, when the African reality tunnel overwhelms his European reality tunnel. It only takes a few weeks in prison to become a convict, whatever your definition of yourself was before. It only takes a few weeks in the army to become a soldier. These remarks are another elucidation of our earlier statement that mind and its contents are functionally identical. The symbolizing process is such that once set in motion, it's virtually impossible without subtle neurological know-how to escape from a reality tunnel one has created for oneself or had foisted upon one by the environment. Curt Saxon is the author of Poor Man's James Bond, a manual that tells you everything you could ever want to know about practical techniques of murder and mayhem. The Survivor, a 4-volume extension of the same libretto, telling where to acquire any possible type of weapon, Root Rot, a diatribe against Alex Haley for implying that slavery was unfair to black people, and several similar books. Mr. Saxon does not get reviewed in the liberal magazines that decide which authors are important, but he has a wide readership among the apocalyptical sects of the right-wing end of the political spectrum. Mr. Saxon wrote in the 1970s that the United States would be destroyed almost totally by 1982. This is because the government has driven the competence, quote, out of business by excessive taxation, which has subsidized 30 million incompetence, quote, on welfare, and another 30 million incompetence, quote, on Social Security. This country has thus become, Saxon says, a Disneyland for dummies. By 1982, Saxon said, the whole economy would collapse. Millions of taxpayers will be unemployed. Millions who are now on Valium or other tranquilizers will go insane when they cannot get more. Drug addicts will swarm over pharmacies looking for dope, ruining everything they don't steal. We will be helpless against Russian attack because our politicians have so devoted themselves to nurturing incompetent dependents that further industrialization to put our nation on a war footing will be unaffordable. Even if it were not, our present union-spoiled and demanding workforce cannot be expected to perform the way our parents did in the war plants of the late 30s and early 40s. The only solution, Saxon informs us, is to buy farms order his books on how to kill people efficiently, and stockpile every type of weaponry to fight off the drooling imbeciles and parasites who will flee the doomed cities and try to steal your crops. Mr. Saxon believed that these are objective predictions based on hard laws of sociology and economics, which he learned from the writings of Ms. Ayn Rand. He did not believe that this apocalyptic reality tunnel in which he lives is in any way an artistic creation, expressing his own emotional anxieties and hostilities. John White believes that the Earth will shift on its axis sometime before 1999. There will be massive loss of life, and civilization will be almost totally destroyed. The only hope you have, he says, is to retreat to a farm, where you will probably be wiped out anyway, but have some advantage over city people in that you won't have tall buildings falling on you when the pole shift sets off earthquakes everywhere. Mr. White believes that these are objective predictions based on eternal laws of karma, which he learned from various occultists and gurus. He does not believe that the apocalyptic reality tunnel in which he lives is in any way an artistic creation, expressing his own emotional anxieties and hostilities. Mr. White also believes that many UFOs are actually demons, and that after the pole shift kills us off, most of us will go to hell, which is not eternal, fortunately, but only timeless. If we confront the world without ideas, we see only a muddle, the formless void that existed before God, intellect, started to create a universe, a system in Genesis. Once we become the image of God by making our own universe, we have a model of the muddle. The muddle is very convenient. We could not be human without it. But it's also very misleading whenever we forget that we have created it. None of the reality models discussed in this chapter, however bizarre they may seem to some readers, are any more arbitrary than the official reality model known as consensus reality, which is a statistical average and not nearly consensual as it seems. Travel 100 miles in any direction and the consensus begins to crumble. Travel 1,000 miles and very little consensus is left. The peoples of the earth are islands, said the late Clement Attlee, shouting at each other over oceans of misunderstanding. Each island is a separate reality tunnel created by our culture, our subculture, and the myth maker or artist in each of us, who is the adamantine individuality that makes you and me unique human selves, not replicable units like the ants in a hive. Robert Anton Wilson is the author of Cosmic Trigger, Schrodinger's Cat, Sex and Drugs, and several other books. Like Mr. Saxon and Mr. White, Wilson does not get reviewed in the liberal magazines that decide which authors are important, but he's a wide leadership among science fiction fans, political libertarians, and veterans of the consciousness revolution. Wilson believes that life extension techniques and intelligence-raising drugs will be discovered in this decade, and will be widely available by 2010. Less radical than Dr. Silverstein, Wilson does not expect immortality to be achieved until the middle of the next century, but he expects life extension drugs will keep him around until then. Wilson expects most of humanity will have migrated off Earth into space cities by 2028. He expects that with higher intelligence and longer lives than past humanity, these post-terrestrials will gradually become superhuman by comparison with our historical average. Wilson believes that these are good guesses based upon scientific probabilities, but he does not think that there are any hard economic or karmic laws guaranteeing them. He recognizes that this reality tunnel was generated by his own brain, that he is the artist who created it, and that it expresses his own hopes and desires as well as scientific probabilities. It is, he knows, the reality tunnel that keeps him happy, creative, busy, and full of zest for life. He doesn't think it's any crazier than anybody else's reality tunnel, and he claims it is a lot more fun than any other. Exercises. 1. Using the four-circuit model, try to guess which specific imprints created Mr. Saxon's reality tunnel. 2. Apply the same analysis to Mr. White and Mr. Wilson. 3. Apply the same analysis to Jesus, Hitler, Walt Whitman, and your own father and mother. 4. Write a critique of this chapter from the viewpoint of Christian fundamentalism. Thus concludes Section 623, Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson. Chapter 15, Different Models and Different Muddles. Tomorrow we continue with Section 624, Chapter 16, The Snafu Principle. I will see you then. Alam.